"You're lazy," Ethan Caldwell barked, his voice slicing through the modern glass-walled office like a sharp wind on a winter morning. Olivia Brooks froze mid-step, her hand hovering over the stack of folders she had been organizing, the metallic clink of paper clips echoing faintly, as if time itself had slowed. The sunlight streaming through the skyscraper windows reflected off the polished steel of the conference table, bouncing a cold, almost judgmental light across the room. Every eye in the office turned toward her, a silent tide of curiosity and tension, their faces etched with a mixture of expectation and surprise. Olivia's gaze didn't waver. She felt the weight of his words pressing down, but beneath it, a quiet fire stirred, a memory of late nights spent on her laptop, studying nonprofit management, community organizing, and civic impact, the small dorm room lamp casting a warm glow over a stack of textbooks and scribbled notes. The scent of polished wood and fresh coffee filled the air, mingling with the sterile tang of the office's high-rise interior, grounding her in the physicality of the moment. Ethan stepped closer, his tailored navy suit stretching slightly across broad shoulders, the subtle sheen of his expensive watch catching the light as his finger jabbed toward her, emphasizing his accusation, while the hum of the ventilation system provided a low, constant backdrop. Olivia's hand dropped to her side, brushing against the soft fabric of her blazer, the familiar texture grounding her, reminding her of every small step she had taken to prepare herself for this world that often underestimated her. Around the edges of the room, assistants shifted uneasily, a pen tapping against a legal pad, the soft squeak of leather shoes against the marble floor punctuating the tension. Olivia inhaled, the faint aroma of lavender from her personal diffuser mingling with the sterile office air, a subtle comfort against the cold scrutiny. Her eyes scanned the floor for a fleeting second, noting the reflection of Ethan's frown in the glossy surface of a side table, before returning her gaze to meet his directly, steady, and unflinching. The city skyline beyond the windows stretched wide, each building catching the morning sun, a panorama of opportunity and challenge mirrored in Olivia's steady heartbeat, a rhythm she could feel in her chest, slow and deliberate, counting each beat as she prepared for what would come next. She adjusted the papers in her hand, smoothing out the edges, the crisp sound sharp in the silence, a subtle declaration of her readiness. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line, his brow furrowed, and he gestured dismissively toward the folders on the desk, a motion sharp and final. Yet Olivia sensed a shift, a flicker of doubt crossing his sharp blue eyes. Almost imperceptible, but enough to let her know that the challenge had begun. The hum of the air conditioner, the muted clicks of computer keys, and the distant rumble of traffic below formed a tapestry of ambient sound that seemed to cocoon the two of them in their own tense world, a bubble where judgment and resolve collided. And in that suspended moment, Olivia felt the weight of countless quiet hours, the lessons absorbed in solitude, the plans carefully mapped, and the strength of her convictions swelling like a tide, ready to meet the world's misjudgment head-on. The office fell into an almost tangible silence, each person frozen in the moment, their gazes flicking between Olivia Brooks and Ethan Caldwell, as if caught in a slow-motion photograph. The sunlight shifted, casting sharp lines across the polished conference table, highlighting the subtle tremor in a pen left unattended by an intern and the tiny glint of a watch face that seemed to mark the passing seconds with unusual weight. Olivia adjusted the stack of folders in her hand, the crisp paper edges making a faint rustling sound, a sound so delicate it could have been ignored, yet in the quiet, it became a declaration of her presence and focus. Around her, the room seemed to breathe in tandem with her own steady rhythm, the soft hum of computers and distant city noise filtering in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating an almost cinematic tension that clung to the air. She could feel the slight chill from the conditioned air brushing against her skin, contrasting with the warmth building inside her chest, a warmth born of preparation, knowledge, and quiet determination. Ethan's piercing blue eyes scanned the room, darting briefly toward the folding chair near the window and the reflective surface of the glass walls that mirrored both his stature and the tension between them. Olivia kept her gaze steady, tracing the lines of the skyline beyond, where morning light danced off neighboring towers, each reflection reminding her that the city outside was alive, vibrant, and full of possibilities. She inhaled slowly, noting the faint scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air, the polished wood of the desk, the subtle hints of leather from chairs surrounding the table, all merging into a sensory tableau that anchored her in the reality of the moment. A junior assistant shifted, the soft creak of their leather shoes on the marble floor sounding amplified, almost like a drumbeat marking the suspense. Olivia's thoughts moved swiftly yet quietly, recalling long nights spent analyzing nonprofit structures, planning outreach programs, calculating impact metrics, each memory reinforcing her confidence as she prepared for the next step. Ethan's hand moved slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture, signaling impatience, but it was the tension in his jaw and the narrowing of his eyes that conveyed the weight of authority and expectation pressing down on her. Olivia's lips pressed together in a thin line, not out of fear, but in deliberate focus, a silent promise to herself and to the principles she had cultivated over years of hard work and study. The faint reflection of the city lights on the glossy surface of a side table behind her caught the corner of her eye, reminding her of the scale of the world outside and the potential influence of a single well-conceived idea. Every subtle sound, the shifting of papers, the soft tapping of a keyboard, the distant hum of traffic, blended into a muted symphony that framed the moment like a carefully composed scene, heightening her awareness of each breath, each heartbeat, each micro-expression on the faces around her. Olivia's eyes briefly met Ethan's again, and in that gaze, there was a silent exchange, an unspoken acknowledgment of challenge and the quiet stirrings of reconsideration. The tension hung heavily, a palpable force pressing against the walls of the office, yet beneath it lay the undercurrent of possibility, a subtle anticipation that the next moment, the next word, or the next action could shift everything in the room. She shifted her weight slightly, the soft rustle of her clothing punctuating the stillness, an understated movement that seemed to ripple through the room, echoing in the subtle glances of onlookers, and Olivia felt the faint surge of empowerment, knowing that her presence alone, measured and deliberate, had begun to alter the atmosphere. The light outside shifted again, casting a golden hue across the skyline, a metaphorical spotlight illuminating the interplay of doubt, determination, and the quiet assertion of capability, marking the threshold of change in the charged, motionless air of the office. Olivia Brooks took a slow breath and allowed her gaze to sweep across the office one more time, the sunlight catching the subtle highlights in her hair and glinting off the edges of the folders she held, grounding her presence in the midst of authority and expectation. The hum of the air conditioning became a soft backdrop to her thoughts, and she recalled the hours she had spent on late nights in her small apartment, poring over community development reports, drafting proposals for projects that could make tangible differences, each idea meticulously measured and analyzed, each plan a quiet testament to her dedication and foresight. She had grown up in a neighborhood where resources were scarce, and every opportunity to help a neighbor had to be earned through initiative and commitment, and that upbringing had instilled in her a quiet resilience, a confidence in her own competence even when others doubted her. Ethan Caldwell stood across the room, his posture erect, the sharp lines of his suit reflecting both his status and the expectations he carried. Yet for the first time, a subtle hesitation flickered in his expression, a slight narrowing of the eyes that betrayed curiosity and the beginnings of acknowledgment. Olivia adjusted the folders in her hands, the crisp rustle cutting gently through the room, a sound that was ordinary yet resonant in the suspended tension, and she allowed herself a brief glance at the cityscape outside, the streets below bustling with life, sunlight reflecting off distant glass towers, a reminder of the broader world her ideas could touch if given a chance. The scent of polished wood from the conference table mingled with the faint aroma of coffee that lingered from the morning, and the low, distant rumble of traffic reminded her that beyond this room, the world continued, waiting for solutions and action, for insight applied with purpose and intent. Around the edges of the office, assistants shifted minutely, the soft scratch of pens on paper marking the passage of seconds, the quiet movement emphasizing the stillness that lay at the center of the room, where Olivia stood composed, her hands steady, her expression serene yet resolute, a quiet force against the implicit challenge before her. She remembered each moment of preparation, each article read, every seminar attended, each instance where she had translated knowledge into practical steps for real change, all converging in this moment where recognition was not yet granted, but potential hung palpably in the air, waiting to be realized. Ethan's eyes, sharp and discerning, traced the contours of her posture, the deliberate calm in her movements, the steadiness in her breathing, and he unconsciously began to weigh the possibilities she presented, the subtle indicators of skill, insight, and commitment that went far beyond the casual judgments he had allowed to shape his initial opinion. Olivia shifted her weight slightly, a deliberate but natural motion that drew no attention to itself, yet in the context of the room, seemed almost monumental, a quiet assertion of presence and purpose, an unspoken promise that she would not be overlooked or underestimated. The sunlight outside continued to shift, brushing the office walls with soft patterns, dancing across the polished surfaces and highlighting the faint reflections of the people gathered, the tension gradually becoming a living thing, stretching and folding over itself as Olivia held her ground, embodying the calm confidence of one who had worked tirelessly, learned patiently, and now waited for the moment when her competence could speak louder than the words of any skeptic. The moment stretched as Ethan Caldwell leaned back slightly in his chair, the polished wood beneath him reflecting the early afternoon sunlight that had shifted across the city skyline, each ray cutting through the glass walls with a brilliance that seemed almost deliberate. Olivia Brooks held her stance, her posture poised, hands resting lightly on the stack of folders, every finger subtly adjusting the edges to maintain order, a silent signal of control and focus in a room charged with observation. The assistant beside the conference table shifted again, the soft scratch of a pen against a notepad echoing faintly, almost drowned out by the distant hum of traffic far below, a reminder of the busy streets and lives outside these high-rise walls. Olivia's eyes moved deliberately, scanning the layout of the office, noting the subtle glint of sunlight on the silver handles of filing cabinets, the reflection of Ethan's expression in the darkened surface of a monitor, each detail anchoring her to the tangible world as her mind calculated the opportunities and outcomes that lay ahead. She could feel the gentle rise and fall of her own chest, the rhythm steady, each breath a quiet affirmation of the preparation she had invested over countless nights, reading reports, attending seminars, and mapping strategic steps for projects that could touch lives far beyond her immediate surroundings. Ethan shifted slightly, the creak of his leather chair pronounced in the stillness, his sharp gaze momentarily flicking toward a digital clock on the wall, the seconds ticking by with quiet insistence, marking the passage of time in this suspended, almost cinematic moment. Olivia's reflection in the glossy surface of the conference table caught her attention, and she allowed herself a brief acknowledgment of the determination etched in her expression, the calm resolve that belied the storm of thought and planning swirling behind her composed demeanor. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, the muted sounds of keys clicking, the gentle rustle of paper, the faint distant sirens blending into an ambient backdrop, all converging into a palpable tension that wrapped around the two of them without notice, a sphere where every movement and micro-expression carried weight. Olivia's mind replayed small triumphs and incremental progress she had achieved quietly, projects that had improved neighborhoods, initiatives she had crafted to provide resources and education to underserved populations, each memory reinforcing her ability to stand firm, to translate vision into action, and to remain unwavering in the presence of scrutiny. Ethan's blue eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked repeatedly between her hands, her posture, and the city view beyond, an unspoken analysis of capability and potential unfolding in real time, as the subtle light of early afternoon illuminated the room with clarity, emphasizing every line, every shadow, every detail. Olivia shifted her weight slightly, a controlled motion that spoke more than words could convey, and the faint click of her heels against the polished floor punctuated the stillness, a gentle yet definite rhythm asserting presence and purpose. The subtle mixture of scents, the polished wood, the lingering aroma of fresh coffee, and her own faint perfume, combined with the visual clarity of the sunlight on the glass and steel around them, grounding her in the moment. And as she lifted her chin, meeting Ethan's gaze with unwavering steadiness, a silent dialogue passed between them. The anticipation of the next exchange, the unspoken acknowledgment of respect and potential, layering the tension with a sense of unfolding opportunity and the first faint stirrings of reconsideration from the man who had moments before doubted her. Olivia Brooks shifted slightly, her hand brushing against the smooth surface of the polished conference table as she organized the folders, each movement deliberate and measured, signaling quiet confidence to the room. The sunlight had moved higher, now streaming in at an angle that cast long, slender reflections across the hardwood floor and the chrome accents of office chairs, catching the dust particles suspended in the air and turning them into tiny golden motes that floated in the stillness. She inhaled deeply, the faint scent of coffee and freshly polished wood mingling with the subtle aroma of her own perfume, grounding her in the present and steadying the rhythm of her heartbeat. Her mind traced the meticulous preparation she had done over months, reviewing community impact studies, drafting outreach plans, and analyzing the needs of neighborhoods, every small detail contributing to the quiet certainty that her proposal had been thoughtfully constructed, a culmination of effort, insight, and careful planning. Ethan Caldwell's posture remained rigid, his hands resting on the arms of his chair, the tailored lines of his suit emphasizing the power and authority he carried. Yet a subtle tension crossed his features, a flicker of consideration in the narrowed blue of his eyes as he began to recognize the depth of capability before him. The assistants along the perimeter of the room remained motionless, pens poised, fingers lightly tapping notepads, each sound amplified in the tension-heavy silence that filled the space. Olivia's eyes scanned the office again, noting the reflective surfaces of monitors and glass partitions, the way sunlight highlighted the clean lines of modern design, and the soft shadows dancing across the floor, each element a reminder of the environment she was navigating with patience and precision. Her fingers lightly traced the edges of the top folder, a tactile connection to the work she had completed and the steps that had brought her to this threshold of potential change. She drew upon memories of earlier days spent volunteering, building small initiatives, and learning from mentors and community organizations, each experience layering upon the next, creating a foundation of knowledge and resilience that fortified her presence now. Ethan's eyes flicked momentarily toward a framed photograph on the wall, a subtle distraction that allowed her to note the slight hesitation in his expression, the internal consideration of something he had previously dismissed. The city beyond the window stretched in all directions, its buildings glowing softly in the afternoon light, a living backdrop to the unfolding encounter. And in that expanse, Olivia felt both the weight of responsibility and the quiet thrill of opportunity, knowing that her insights could ripple outward beyond this room. A soft click echoed as one assistant adjusted a chair, the gentle sound punctuating the stillness, and Olivia adjusted her stance slightly, the controlled motion communicating an unspoken readiness to engage, to contribute, and to demonstrate the depth of understanding that had been quietly cultivated. The air seemed to hold its breath with her, the combined silence, light, and subtle sounds coalescing into a moment of poised anticipation, a space where insight and authority met, and the first hints of acknowledgment began to stir in the expression of the man who had only moments ago doubted her capacity, the room a suspended stage for the gradual unfolding of recognition and respect. Olivia Brooks straightened her shoulders and stepped forward, the soft click of her polished flats against the marble floor marking a deliberate rhythm in the quiet room. She opened the top folder, revealing meticulously organized charts, community surveys, and drafted proposals, each page reflecting the depth of her research and the precision of her planning. The sunlight, now climbing higher, glinted off the glass partitions and reflected across the polished table surface, casting a delicate web of light that seemed to illuminate the significance of the moment. Ethan Caldwell leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting as his piercing blue eyes scanned the documents, the faint furrow of his brow hinting at the surprise building within him. The assistants around the room remained still, pens hovering, their soft breaths and the distant hum of the city outside blending into an ambient soundtrack that heightened the suspense. Olivia spoke calmly, her voice steady and clear, detailing the projected impacts of her proposed initiatives, from improving local educational programs to providing sustainable resources for underserved neighborhoods, each sentence carrying a measured confidence that resonated through the room. Her hands moved with purposeful gestures, pointing to graphs and charts, the subtle movement accentuated by the shifting sunlight, giving weight to the words she had chosen carefully over weeks of preparation. Ethan's attention, once fixed on her dismissively, now wavered as he traced the outlines of each chart, the quantitative data and potential outcomes challenging his initial assumptions. His lips pressed together in contemplation. Olivia's eyes met his briefly, conveying both professionalism and an unspoken determination, a quiet assurance that her expertise was grounded in experience and research, not ambition for recognition. The scent of coffee, polished wood, and faint perfume filled the room, mingling with the soft resonance of her words, creating an atmosphere charged with intellectual energy and anticipation. Each page turned, each graph highlighted, emphasized the meticulous care she had invested, and the cumulative effect began to shift the room's dynamic, the silent acknowledgment of capability becoming palpable in the attentive gazes of those present. Ethan's fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, a subtle motion revealing his internal calculation as he absorbed the depth of Olivia's proposal, the innovative approaches and tangible community benefits challenging the framework of authority he had assumed he held unchallenged. Olivia continued, articulating the practical steps for implementation, the scalability of initiatives, and the ways in which collaboration with local organizations could amplify impact, her voice a steady cadence that contrasted with the earlier tension and conveyed an unassailable clarity of purpose. The light outside shifted once more, catching the reflective surfaces of pens, laptops, and the glass walls, accentuating the interplay of patience, preparation, and quiet authority that now defined the room. With each point she made, the subtle change in Ethan's expression grew more pronounced, his posture slightly less rigid, a flicker of recognition and reconsideration passing across his features, signaling the moment when assessment began to replace judgment and the potential for respect quietly emerged in the charged, sunlit conference room. Ethan Caldwell shifted slightly in his chair, the leather creaking under the subtle adjustment of his weight, a faint gesture that betrayed the conflict beginning to stir within him. Olivia Brooks remained composed, the soft rustle of her papers marking the rhythm of her calm presence, a deliberate contrast to the tension that still lingered in the room. The sunlight had moved again, now highlighting the polished edges of the conference table and casting elongated shadows that stretched toward the far corners of the office, giving a subtle visual weight to the moment of reckoning. Ethan's eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked over each chart and note again, tracing the lines, numbers, and projections that Olivia had prepared, the meticulous organization revealing the depth of her understanding and the quiet force of her diligence. Around them, assistants and colleagues maintained a cautious silence, pens poised midair, eyes occasionally darting to the reflections on the glass walls, the faint hum of the ventilation system and distant city noise providing a soft, persistent background that underscored the stillness. Olivia adjusted the top folder slightly, allowing a clean view of a key page with community impact projections, her finger lightly indicating a line of data, her gesture measured, intentional, and full of quiet authority. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly, the initial doubt now giving way to recognition as he considered the practical implications of the proposal, the potential reach and benefit of each initiative, and the vision embedded in the careful calculations. The sunlight flickered across the glossy surface of the table as he leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the polished wood, and a soft exhalation escaped him, unnoticed by most but significant in the shift of atmosphere. Olivia maintained her poise, her gaze unwavering, acknowledging his movement with a subtle nod, the faint shift in her expression conveying awareness of the emerging consideration and respect. The reflections of the city outside the tall windows danced across the office, interplaying with the shadows of chairs and folders, a visual reminder of the wider impact beyond the room, and Olivia allowed herself a brief internal acknowledgment of the countless late nights and careful study that had prepared her for this opportunity. Ethan lifted a hand, fingers slightly spread, pausing as if measuring the weight of his response, the room holding its collective breath in anticipation, every subtle movement magnified in the quiet. Olivia's chest rose and fell in a calm rhythm, each breath deliberate, reinforcing the sense of composed certainty that she carried into the room, her entire presence signaling both readiness and assurance. The assistants shifted minutely, the soft tapping of a pen against a notebook marking time, while Olivia subtly realigned a stack of papers, the simple motion resonating in the stillness, emphasizing her deliberate, grounded approach. Ethan's gaze lingered on the charts, then on Olivia's steady eyes, the calculation of impact and feasibility slowly replacing the initial judgment, the room vibrating with the silent acknowledgment that the dynamic had shifted. The sunlight continued to stretch across the office, illuminating each detail, the polished table, the reflective walls, the meticulous arrangement of documents, and the poised figure of Olivia Brooks, signaling that the moment had reached a quiet turning point, a suspended threshold where authority, preparation, and recognition converged, leaving an unmistakable impression of capability, clarity, and emerging respect. Olivia Brooks straightened fully, her chin lifted slightly as she allowed her gaze to sweep slowly across the room, taking in the subtle shifts in posture, the faint tightening of shoulders, and the softened expressions of those who had only moments before observed with passive curiosity. The sunlight pouring through the glass walls cast long, warm reflections across the polished floor and conference table, catching the edges of documents and pens, turning them into quiet focal points that drew the eye without distraction. She felt the calm rise within her, a steady pulse matching the gentle rhythm of the city outside, the distant sounds of traffic and muffled street noise forming a backdrop that made the room feel contained yet expansive at the same time. Her hands rested lightly on the folder, fingertips tracing the edges of pages that contained carefully analyzed data, projections, and actionable steps, each element reflecting countless hours of research, community engagement, and thoughtful preparation. Ethan Caldwell's gaze lingered on the table for a moment before rising to meet hers, the sharpness in his blue eyes softening into curiosity as the weight of insight and competence began to replace the initial judgment that had prompted his early dismissal. The assistants along the perimeter remained motionless, pens hovering above notepads, the subtle rustle of paper and faint hum of office machinery adding texture to the otherwise still environment, a quiet affirmation that attention was focused entirely on the exchange unfolding. Olivia took a measured breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly while maintaining an air of controlled authority, allowing the calm assurance of her presence to settle into the room, each movement deliberate and filled with unspoken intent. The city skyline framed her behind the glass, its towers and reflective surfaces catching the shifting sunlight, emphasizing the contrast between the vast urban landscape and the intimate, charged interaction within the office, reminding her of both the scale of potential impact and the tangible steps necessary to enact change. Ethan's hands rested on the arms of his chair, the faint tapping of fingers conveying an internal rhythm of calculation as he weighed each point she had made, reconsidering assumptions and observing the precision with which she articulated practical solutions and long-term benefits. Olivia's eyes traced the lines of sunlight on the floor, noticing the way reflections highlighted the contours of the office, the folds of papers, and the subtle movements of her colleagues, each detail reinforcing her awareness and grounding her in the present moment. She shifted slightly, a natural, controlled movement that realigned her stance and subtly emphasized her composure, the gentle sound of her shoes against the marble punctuating the silence in an understated rhythm. Every glance, every detail of the room, the polished surfaces, the glint of sunlight on metal fixtures, the alignment of documents, and the poised presence of Olivia herself, worked together to reinforce the quiet power she carried, a presence of clarity, competence, and readiness that began to settle over Ethan and the observers alike. The soft mixture of scents from polished wood, fresh coffee, and the faint aroma of her own perfume added an almost imperceptible layer to the sensory environment, heightening focus and signaling a subtle command of space and atmosphere. Olivia's steady breath, the deliberate pacing of her eyes, and the composed way she held her materials created a tension that was no longer solely about judgment, but now about recognition, anticipation, and the unspoken acknowledgment of capability and potential that had begun to quietly transform the energy of the room. Ethan Caldwell leaned back in his chair, the polished leather shifting beneath him with a soft, measured creak, his gaze lingering on Olivia Brooks as she maintained her composed stance, the calm strength in her posture commanding attention without a single word. The sunlight streaming through the expansive glass walls continued to move across the room, highlighting the sleek lines of the conference table, the subtle reflections on chrome fixtures, and the carefully organized charts and folders that Olivia had prepared, each detail contributing to the quiet weight of her presence. Her fingers rested lightly on the top folder, tracing the edges of the papers in a deliberate, steady rhythm that conveyed confidence and a sense of purpose, as though every motion was a reflection of the thought and effort behind the work she had presented. Ethan's piercing blue eyes scanned the materials once more, the initial dismissiveness replaced by focused consideration as he absorbed the depth of analysis and foresight embedded in the projections, the careful balance between measurable outcomes and practical implementation capturing his attention in ways he had not anticipated. Around the edges of the room, assistants remained motionless, pens poised midair, subtle shifting in chairs and soft rustling of papers punctuating the silence in understated rhythm, a testament to the charged atmosphere and the intensity of observation that hung in the air. Olivia allowed her gaze to drift toward the city beyond the windows, the streets and buildings bathed in warm afternoon light, a reminder of the lives and communities her proposals could touch, and a silent affirmation of the real-world significance of her efforts. The faint aroma of polished wood and coffee mingled with her subtle personal fragrance, grounding the sensory environment and reinforcing a sense of calm authority that radiated quietly yet unmistakably through the space. Ethan's fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, a subconscious cadence mirroring the mental calculations running rapidly through his mind as he weighed each component, considered the implications, and began to reconcile the earlier underestimation with the competence before him. Olivia adjusted the top folder slightly, revealing an additional set of charts detailing resource allocation, volunteer engagement, and long-term sustainability, her movements measured, precise, and intentional, reinforcing the message of readiness and capability without a single exclamation. The sunlight reflected off the glossy surface of the table and the metallic accents of office fixtures, dancing across documents and creating subtle highlights that drew attention to critical sections of her work, enhancing the visual clarity and focus within the room. Her posture remained perfectly aligned, her breathing calm and controlled, each exhale deliberate, filling the quiet space with a subtle rhythm that contrasted with the latent tension and underscored her presence. Ethan's expression softened minutely as he processed the information, the furrow of his brow easing and a subtle nod almost imperceptible, yet signaling the first glimmer of recognition for the insight and preparation Olivia had brought forth. The assistants shifted slightly, pens tapping gently against notepads, chairs creaking faintly, all blending into a muted soundtrack that heightened the cinematic stillness of the room. Olivia's eyes met Ethan's once more, steady and unwavering, conveying a combination of professionalism, determination, and quiet authority that spoke louder than words ever could, establishing a subtle but unmistakable shift in the balance of respect and attention in the sunlit office. Each reflective surface, from the glass walls to the polished table, captured the interplay of light, shadow, and movement, emphasizing the deliberate poise and steadfast composure that Olivia embodied, a presence that began to redefine the perception of capability and competence in the charged atmosphere of the room. The subtle tension in the office shifted perceptibly as Ethan Caldwell leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the polished table, his sharp blue eyes scanning Olivia Brooks with an intensity that had transformed from skepticism to cautious intrigue. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated the charts and folders she had meticulously arranged, highlighting the detailed projections and community impact plans, each page reflecting countless hours of research and precise analysis. Olivia's fingers lightly tapped the edge of a page, a controlled, rhythmic motion that reinforced her calm presence while signaling readiness and authority. The assistants around the room remained motionless, pens suspended above notepads, chairs slightly creaking as if each micro-movement carried significance, the faint hum of the ventilation system blending with distant city sounds to create a cinematic backdrop for the exchange. Ethan's eyes lingered on a specific chart illustrating projected improvements in local education programs, his expression subtly changing as he traced the numbers with a fingertip, recognition dawning as he absorbed the practical feasibility and the tangible benefits of the initiatives she had proposed. Olivia spoke clearly, her voice steady and measured, detailing the step-by-step implementation strategies, volunteer engagement metrics, and long-term sustainability plans, each phrase articulated with deliberate precision and conviction, emphasizing the depth of her preparation and the thoughtfulness of her approach. The sunlight shifted again, casting patterns across the reflective surfaces of monitors and glass partitions, creating highlights that emphasized both the material and symbolic weight of the proposals before them. Ethan's hands moved slightly, fingers brushing the polished wood of the table, a subtle unconscious gesture of consideration, his posture relaxing fractionally as he began to reconcile the earlier underestimation with the undeniable clarity and competence now evident before him. Olivia's gaze remained steady, occasionally flicking toward the city beyond the windows, drawing a quiet parallel between the scope of the urban landscape and the potential impact of her carefully planned initiatives, each element reinforcing the seriousness and dedication underlying her presentation. The faint aroma of coffee mingled with polished wood and her subtle personal fragrance, grounding the room and adding an understated layer of sensory focus that seemed to accentuate the calm authority she projected. The room seemed suspended in quiet anticipation, the soft rustle of papers, gentle tapping of pens, and occasional creak of leather chairs marking the slow rhythm of thought and evaluation. Ethan's eyes shifted from the charts to Olivia herself, taking in her composed posture, deliberate movements, and the confident clarity in her voice, each observation layering additional recognition of the insight and competence she embodied. Olivia's calm breath, measured and unhurried, reinforced the controlled atmosphere, the subtle rise and fall of her chest echoing the steady pulse of the room. As Ethan leaned back slightly, a faint nod of acknowledgment passed across his expression, signaling the internal shift from doubt to appreciation, the moment when understanding began to replace judgment, and the dynamic in the sunlit office transformed into one of measured respect, quiet acknowledgment, and the first real signs of collaborative possibility. Ethan Caldwell leaned back slowly, his hands resting lightly on the polished armrests of his chair as he exhaled, a long, deliberate breath that seemed to release a weight he had not fully acknowledged until this moment. His eyes, usually sharp with certainty, now softened slightly, reflecting an internal dialogue that he had not permitted himself to voice aloud, a quiet reckoning with the assumptions he had carried into the room that morning. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows highlighted the subtle furrows of his brow, the tension in his shoulders gradually easing, casting delicate shadows across the sleek conference table that mirrored the thoughtful transformation unfolding within him. Olivia Brooks remained poised, her posture steady, a subtle nod acknowledging his silent contemplation, her calm presence amplifying the shift that had begun to take place in his perception. The office, filled with the muted sounds of pens lightly tapping, pages softly shifting, and distant traffic below, held a charged stillness, each detail accentuating the gravity of the moment without the need for words. Ethan's mind traced back to the initial dismissal, the snap judgment that had prompted his comment, and he could not ignore the layers of preparation, insight, and diligence that Olivia had revealed, the depth of her work unfolding like a meticulous map of possibility across the conference table. He ran a hand across his face briefly, the smooth texture of the polished wood under his fingers grounding him, a tactile connection to reality as he considered the quiet competence and unwavering focus Olivia had displayed, the evidence of her capability undeniable and resonant. The sunlight shifted again, illuminating the edges of charts and folders, creating a subtle glow that accentuated the careful organization and the clarity of her presentation. each visual cue reinforcing the weight of preparation and intentionality behind her proposals. Ethan's gaze moved from the documents to Olivia herself, taking in the controlled rhythm of her gestures, the steady rise and fall of her chest, the unspoken confidence radiating in her stance. And he felt a quiet humility, a recognition of the insight he had overlooked and the potential she carried into the room. The assistants along the perimeter remained silent, their slight movements and attentive eyes marking the transition in atmosphere, the previously charged tension softening into a contemplative acknowledgment of skill and poise. Olivia's hands rested lightly on the folder, her fingers adjusting a page with subtle precision, reinforcing the impression of methodical capability and thoughtful execution, the room absorbing her measured authority without the need for overt assertion. Ethan's lips pressed together briefly, a micro-expression of self-reflection as he considered the broader implications of the initiatives before him, the impact they could have on communities and lives far beyond the walls of the office. The city skyline beyond the windows shimmered in the afternoon light, the streets and buildings alive with movement, a reminder of the tangible reach and significance of well-conceived action, and Ethan felt a growing awareness of his own prior misjudgment, a silent concession to the competence and vision Olivia embodied. The ambient sounds, the shifting sunlight, and the subtle reflections of the office furnishings framed a moment of quiet introspection, a pause in which judgment gave way to understanding, and a man who had begun the day with certainty found himself reconsidering the value of attention, respect, and acknowledgment in the presence of deliberate, thoughtful skill. Olivia Brooks carefully closed the top folder, her hands resting lightly on the smooth cover as she allowed a brief pause to settle over the room, a silence filled not with tension, but with quiet acknowledgment of the depth of her insight. The sunlight had shifted once more, casting a golden hue across the city skyline visible through the expansive windows, each building reflecting the warmth of the afternoon in a subtle reminder of the world outside that could be shaped by thoughtful action. Ethan Caldwell leaned forward, his elbows lightly resting on the polished surface of the conference table, his gaze intent and unwavering as he examined the documents she had presented, each line and graph now resonating with clear, tangible significance. Olivia's eyes met his, steady and assured, conveying an unspoken understanding that the preparation and effort behind her work were grounded in experience, foresight, and a genuine commitment to impact, a quiet authority that transcended the initial misjudgment. The assistants along the perimeter remained motionless, pens hovering above notepads, their subtle breaths and occasional shifts punctuating the ambient hum of the office and distant city noise, which blended into a soft, persistent soundtrack framing the unfolding moment. Ethan's fingers traced the edge of a chart depicting community outreach metrics, his expression revealing the first hints of genuine reflection as he considered the potential reach and benefit of the initiatives Olivia had meticulously designed. She allowed herself a subtle smile, just enough to acknowledge the shift in the energy of the room, her posture remaining composed and dignified, a quiet testament to preparation and poise. The sunlight glinted off the polished wood of the table and the chrome accents of office furniture, creating fleeting reflections that highlighted the careful organization of the documents and the clarity of her strategic vision. Olivia spoke again, her voice calm, precise, and deliberate, articulating how each program could be implemented step by step, the resources required, and the ways in which measurable outcomes could be tracked and optimized for maximum effect. Her words resonating with authenticity and clarity that drew the attention and respect of everyone present. Ethan's posture relaxed fractionally, a subtle nod crossing his face as he began to internalize the implications of her vision, the depth of preparation and integrity she had demonstrated transforming the initial skepticism into genuine regard. The room seemed to breathe along with her measured movements, the quiet rustle of paper and soft tapping of pens now harmonizing with the rhythm of attentive observation, each detail emphasizing the transition from judgment to recognition. Olivia's presence filled the space with a composed energy that demanded respect not through assertion but through competence, clarity, and careful consideration, the very atmosphere of the office shifting to reflect the acknowledgement of skill and insight. The light outside continued to dance across the glass and polished surfaces, illuminating both the tangible work laid before them and the metaphorical weight of vision and impact, marking the point at which authority and preparation aligned to create the first undeniable recognition of capability, understanding, and the quiet, powerful affirmation of potential realized. The room was quiet now, the tension having transformed into a subtle sense of resolution, the sunlight filling every corner with a warm, golden glow that seemed to wrap around both Olivia Brooks and Ethan Caldwell. Olivia adjusted the stack of folders one last time, her fingers brushing gently over the edges as if sealing the effort and intention contained within them, a quiet ritual that marked the culmination of careful preparation and thoughtful planning. Ethan sat back, the lines of his posture softening, eyes tracing the city skyline beyond the windows, the streets bustling below yet distant, as though the world outside was waiting to witness the ripple of impact that Olivia's vision promised. He lifted a hand, brushing it lightly against his chin, his gaze returning to the table where charts and notes lay meticulously aligned, each one a testament to dedication and competence, a silent acknowledgment of the insight and leadership Olivia had demonstrated. The assistants along the edges of the room remained still, pens poised, their eyes following every subtle gesture. The hum of the office merging with distant city sounds to create an ambient backdrop that heightened the sense of reflective closure. Olivia's stance was steady, composed, every motion deliberate and measured, her eyes occasionally sweeping the room to acknowledge the quiet attention, a subtle command of presence that needed no words to establish authority and respect. The sunlight danced on the polished surfaces, highlighting the chrome fixtures, the glossy table, and the reflective glass, each shimmer enhancing the visual resonance of her preparation and meticulous care, amplifying the quiet dignity that filled the room. Ethan's blue eyes met hers for a long, unspoken moment, a recognition passing silently between them, an understanding that went beyond words and rested on mutual respect and acknowledgment of capability. The faint aroma of coffee and polished wood blended with her subtle personal fragrance, grounding the scene and reinforcing the atmosphere of careful, thoughtful presence, each detail layering into the tableau of recognition and acknowledgement. Olivia shifted slightly, a measured, natural movement that emphasized poise and readiness, while Ethan's posture relaxed further, his fingers drumming lightly on the polished table in a slow, contemplative rhythm, a subtle indication of reflection and internal realignment. The sunlight continued to shift across the room, illuminating the subtle movements, the lines of the charts, and the careful alignment of materials, highlighting the interplay of preparation, focus, and quiet authority that Olivia embodied. Around them, the office breathed in muted harmony, the soft rustle of paper, faint tapping of pens, and occasional shift of leather chairs forming a gentle cadence that underscored the transformation of the space from tension to acknowledgement. Olivia allowed herself a small, serene smile, the first expression that conveyed the satisfaction of purpose fulfilled, of insight communicated effectively, and of the quiet but undeniable respect earned. Ethan's eyes lingered on her for a long moment, then returned to the documents, tracing familiar lines with a new appreciation, a recognition that intelligence, preparation, and integrity held a power beyond authority alone. The city beyond the windows continued its rhythm, unaware but reflective of the potential change and progress that could stem from this room, and within the warm sunlight, the interplay of light, reflection, and presence marked the final shift from judgment to recognition, from skepticism to respect, and from initial dismissal to the acknowledgement of talent, vision, and quiet, enduring influence.